Ethan Moore had learned to live with quiet. It followed him through his apartment like a second shadow, settling into the corners Lucas Bennett no longer noticed. They had been together long enough that silence was no longer awkward, it was practical, almost efficient. Lucas worked late, came home tired, kissed Ethan on the cheek, and talked about plans they never quite reached. Ethan listened, nodded, and told himself this was what stability looked like, but stability, he was beginning to realize, could feel a lot like being parked on the side of the road. That morning, Ethan left the apartment earlier than usual. Lucas was still asleep, one arm thrown across Ethan's empty pillow as if muscle memory alone could keep him close. Ethan paused in the doorway, watching the slow rise and fall of Lucas's chest, feeling a familiar mix of affection and distance. He told himself he would talk to him later. He always did. Outside, the city was awake in that restless way it got before noon. Ethan unlocked his bike and pushed off, letting the rhythm of pedaling quiet his thoughts. Riding was one of the few places where his mind didn't circle back to unanswered questions. On a bike, there was only balance, direction, and momentum. He didn't notice the man at first. It wasn't until Ethan slowed near a narrow street under construction that a voice cut gently through the noise, "Careful there. That road curves sharper than it looks." Ethan turned. The man stood a few feet behind him, tall, relaxed, wearing a faded jacket and an expression that suggested he knew this street well. His skin was deep brown, his eyes steady and observant, not intrusive. There was something grounding about him, as if he belonged exactly where he was. "I've ridden it before," Ethan said automatically. The man smiled, not challenging him. "Still. Sometimes it helps to have someone tell you when to lean." Ethan hesitated, then laughed softly. "You offering directions now?" "Only if you want them," the man replied. "Name's Caleb Johnson." "Ethan." They stood there longer than necessary, traffic humming around them. Ethan felt an unexpected ease, the kind that didn't demand anything. He mounted his bike again, unsure why he was doing it, and nodded toward the road. "All right," he said. "You can tell me." Caleb stayed behind him as Ethan started forward. His voice carried clearly, calm and unhurried. "Easy now. Don't fight the turn. Let it happen." Ethan did. The bike leaned, tires gripping the pavement, and for a brief moment, everything aligned. Caleb's voice wasn't loud, but it was certain, and Ethan realized how long it had been since anyone had guided him without expectation. When they reached the end of the street, Ethan stopped and turned back, his heart beating faster than the ride alone could explain. "Thanks," he said. Caleb shrugged. "Anytime." They parted without exchanging numbers, and Ethan told himself that was the end of it. Still, all the way to work, Caleb's voice lingered in his thoughts, not as a temptation, but as a reminder of something simple he had forgotten, how it felt to be attentive, to be present. That evening, Lucas barely looked up from his phone when Ethan came home. "You're late," Lucas said. "Traffic," Ethan replied, though the lie tasted thin. They ate dinner side by side, talking about surface things, work, errands, weekend plans that remained vague. Ethan watched Lucas speak, noticing how his words filled space but rarely reached him anymore. Later, Ethan messaged Maya Reynolds, his closest friend, telling her he felt restless without knowing why. She replied with a single line, "Restlessness usually knows exactly why." Ethan lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, thinking of a stranger's voice and the way it had steadied him that he didn't plan to see Caleb again. That was the story he told himself. Yet 2 days later, he took the same route, slowing near the curved street as if by habit. Caleb was there, leaning against a fence, as if he'd been waiting without actually waiting. "You came back," Caleb said. "So did you." Caleb smiled. "Guess we both like this road." They walked their bikes for a while, talking about nothing important and everything that mattered. Caleb didn't ask about Ethan's relationship, and Ethan didn't offer. That restraint made the conversation feel safer, almost respectful. Still, something unspoken stretched between them, thin but strong. Before they parted, Caleb said, "You ride like someone who's always ready to stop." Ethan frowned. "Is that bad?" "Not bad," Caleb replied. "Just careful." At home, Lucas told Ethan about a promotion possibility, his voice bright for the first time in weeks. Ethan congratulated him, meant it, and felt the familiar guilt settle in. Nothing had happened. Nothing inappropriate. And yet, something had shifted. That night, Ethan stood on the balcony alone, the city lights blurring into a restless glow. He thought about control, about guidance, about how easily he had trusted a stranger's voice from behind. He thought about how little danger there had seemed at the time. The truth arrived quietly, without drama. Ethan wasn't afraid of falling. He was afraid of realizing how much he wanted to let go. As he went back inside, he knew this was only the beginning, even if he couldn't yet say of what. Ethan Moore began to measure his days by coincidence. He told himself it was accidental that he took the longer route home, that it just happened to pass the curved street where the pavement narrowed and the city seemed to lower its voice. When he saw Caleb Johnson there again, hands in his jacket pockets, Ethan felt a quiet relief that unsettled him more than surprise would have. They didn't greet each other like strangers anymore. There was a nod, a shared half-smile, an understanding that neither of them needed to explain why they were there. Ethan dismounted and walked his bike beside Caleb, the tires whispering against the concrete. "You always ride alone?" Caleb asked. "Mostly," Ethan said. "It's easier." Caleb glanced at him. "Easier doesn't always mean lighter." The comment landed softly but stayed. Ethan wondered how a man he barely knew could read him so easily, or whether he was projecting his own restlessness onto a receptive surface. Either way, he didn't correct him. Their conversations grew more deliberate. Caleb spoke about moving cities often, about learning how to leave before a place told him to. He never framed it as regret, but Ethan sensed the weight beneath the calm delivery. Ethan, in turn, spoke about work, about routines, about Lucas in ways that were factual but carefully incomplete. He avoided the word boyfriend, as if naming it would invite judgment or demand choices he wasn't ready to make. At home, Lucas noticed the changes before Ethan did. He noticed the way Ethan checked his phone more often, how his answers came half a second too late. One evening, as they cleaned up after dinner, Lucas said, "You've been somewhere else lately." Ethan froze, then forced a smile. "Just tired." Lucas studied him, searching for something familiar. "If something's wrong, you tell me, right?" "Of course," Ethan said, and hated how convincing it sounded. The lie didn't feel dramatic. It felt practical, like keeping a door closed to avoid a draft. Ethan told himself he wasn't doing anything wrong. He hadn't crossed any lines. He was just talking. Just listening. But the truth pressed closer every time Caleb spoke his name, every time Ethan felt understood without having to explain himself. Maya Reynolds noticed too. Over coffee, she watched Ethan stir the same cup long after the sugar had dissolved. "You're distracted," she said. "That's not your normal brand of anxious." Ethan laughed weakly. "Didn't know I had a brand." "You do," Maya replied. "And this isn't it." He considered telling her about Caleb, about the bike, about the voice behind him that had made him feel steadier than he'd felt in months. Instead, he said, "Do you think it's possible to want something without meaning to hurt anyone?" Maya didn't answer immediately. "Wanting isn't the problem," she said finally. "Hiding is." The word followed Ethan home. That night, Lucas fell asleep quickly, his breathing deep and even. Ethan lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying small moments with Caleb that felt larger than they should have. A glance held too long. A pause before a reply. The way Caleb never stepped closer, never touched him, as if restraint itself were a form of intimacy. When Ethan met Caleb again, the air between them felt tighter, charged with things neither had said. They rode together this time, Caleb behind him, his voice guiding without rushing. "Slow down," Caleb said. "You don't need to outrun the turn." Ethan obeyed. He realized, with a jolt of clarity, that this was what scared him. Not the closeness, but how easily he surrendered to it. He trusted Caleb without knowing his future, his intentions, or his limits. That trust felt earned in a way that made Ethan question how long it had been since he'd felt the same with Lucas. Afterward, They sat on a low wall, bikes resting against it like quiet witnesses. "You seem torn," Caleb said. Ethan exhaled. "I am." Caleb nodded, as if he'd expected nothing else. "I don't want to be a secret." "I didn't ask you to be," Ethan said quickly. "I know," Caleb replied. "But secrets have a way of forming around hesitation." The words were not an ultimatum, yet Ethan felt their weight. For the first time, he understood that whatever this was between them could not remain undefined forever. Emotional closeness, he realized, demanded accountability just as much as physical closeness did. At home, the tension finally surfaced. Lucas confronted Ethan gently, without accusation, which somehow made it worse. "Are you still here with me?" Lucas asked. Ethan opened his mouth, then closed it. The silence answered for him. Lucas looked away, pain flickering across his face before he masked it. "I don't need perfection," he said. "I just need honesty." Ethan promised he would be honest soon. Even as he said it, he knew "soon" was another kind of delay. The next time Ethan rode the curved street alone, Caleb wasn't there. The absence felt loud. Ethan rode slower than usual, aware of every imbalance, every correction he had to make without guidance. That he understood then that this was no longer about curiosity. It was about choice. And choices, once recognized, demanded to be made. As he reached the end of the road, Ethan stopped, heart heavy with anticipation and dread. He knew the calm he'd borrowed could not last. Whatever came next would require him to steer for himself, or finally admit where he wanted to go. Ethan Moore did not avoid the conversation anymore. Avoidance had exhausted itself, leaving behind a dull ache that followed him through the apartment. Lucas Bennett noticed the change immediately, the way Ethan moved with intention now, as if every step carried weight. They sat across from each other at the small kitchen table, the same place where they had planned trips they never took and discussed futures they assumed would wait. Lucas folded his hands, steady but tense. "Talk to me," Lucas said. Ethan swallowed. The truth pressed against his ribs, urgent and unforgiving. "I've been emotionally somewhere else," he began. "Not physically. But that doesn't make it harmless." Lucas didn't interrupt. His silence felt heavier than anger would have. "There's someone I met," Ethan continued. "Caleb Johnson. I didn't mean for it to happen. I told myself it was nothing. But I hid it from you, and that's when it became something." Lucas closed his eyes briefly, absorbing the words. "So you gave someone else the parts of you I've been trying to reach?" Ethan nodded. "Yes." The honesty burned, but it also cleared the air in a way Ethan hadn't realized he needed. Lucas leaned back, staring at the wall behind Ethan as if searching for an exit that didn't exist. "I could handle distance," Lucas said quietly. "What I can't handle is being replaced without knowing." "I didn't replace you," Ethan said, then stopped. The correction felt defensive, incomplete. "I failed you. That's the truth." They sat with that truth between them, unadorned and raw. There were no raised voices, no dramatic gestures, only the slow dismantling of something that had once felt permanent. Later that evening, Ethan found himself standing on the curved street again, bike at his side. Caleb Johnson was there, as if drawn by the same gravity that had pulled Ethan back. "I talked to him," Ethan said without preamble. Caleb studied his face. And I stopped pretending," Ethan replied. "I won't live in between anymore." Caleb nodded, relief and restraint mixing in his expression. "I won't be a reason someone else gets hurt." "You're not," Ethan said. "I am. Or I was." They walked their bikes together one last time. The silence between them felt different now, not charged with possibility, but grounded in respect. "I don't regret meeting you," Ethan said. "You reminded me I was still capable of feeling." Caleb smiled faintly. "Feeling is never the problem. What we do with it is." At the end of the street, Caleb stopped. "Whatever you choose next, choose it fully." Ethan watched him leave, aware that loss didn't always come from endings. Sometimes it came from clarity. The following days were quiet but honest. Ethan and Lucas spoke again, not to repair what had broken, but to understand it. They acknowledged love without denying damage. There were tears, apologies, and an acceptance that timing and truth didn't always align. When Lucas moved out, the apartment felt emptier, but also lighter. Ethan rode his bike alone that evening, no guiding voice behind him. The road curved as it always had, but this time, Ethan leaned on his own instinct that he didn't know where he was headed yet. Only that, for the first time in a long while, the direction would be his choice.